whom the courts have said we really can't make significant changes to benefits. We have to pay those benefits off. So as we look at paying down the UAL in a different way, that really is, for the bulk of the cost driver that we're looking at right now, our option. We can either pay it off in the way that the PERS board lays out with the 20-year amortization period of any debt, or we can pay it off through finding other dollars to put into the system earlier. It's been helpful for us to look at the unfunded liability. I believe maybe I didn't skip a slide in there. To look at the unfunded liability by employer type. And often we talk about this large $21 billion unfunded liability. When you include side accounts, which are dollars that are already in the system to offset those costs, it's actually a $15 billion liability. And that liability is split between a number of employers. So you can see here, the state has about $3.25 billion of that liability. Cities and counties each have about $2 billion of liability. School districts, which ultimately receive the bulk of their funding from the state as well, hold about $5.4 billion of that liability, and then the rest is split among other employers. The third column here is another way that it's been helpful for us to think about employer rates, and that is the UAL, the unfunded liability, as a percent of payroll. So compared to what your payroll is, how much liability do you as an individual employer actually hold? And averaged across employer types, you'll see that there's a range from about 125% to about 175%. And broken down within employer types, we see for the most part, most employers are between 100 and 200% of liability, of payroll for their liability. Particularly within school districts, there's a large number of employers where their liability is actually up over 200% of their total payroll, which is somewhat concerning, and I'll talk more about that as we move on. As we looked at principles for bringing a bill forward, for creating and bringing a bill forward, the governor looked at a number of different things. First of all, making sure that we help all employers meet their own PERS obligations in the best way possible. The task force, through their work, heard from some employers that they were prepared for the increased costs that they saw, the increased employer rates. They had made plans already, and they really didn't want the state to make changes to how they would pay those rates. We heard from other employers that they really hoped to have help. And so one of the principles that we kept in mind was making sure that we allowed flexibility so that with 900 different employers, if you combine the state, still over 700 different employers, could each address paying down their UAL in the way that worked best for them and for their constituents.